Hey guys, it's so good to be here for a little Yes Live. My name is Heather Cleary. I'm a writer that lives in San Diego. I homeschool my kids. I write at my desk, which is right here, and I talk a lot about using little yeses, what I call tiny little steps forward of bravery to free yourself from anxiety and live a rich life full of creativity and joy. Today, I'm going to be talking about the way I think about goals and especially responding to readers' questions about goals. Some people were very generous with their time and sent in some really great questions that I think really get to the heart of why, for anxious people like me and probably you, goals can almost seem overwhelming and like they would make our lives worse, that they would make our anxiety worse. And what I want to talk about today is a way of looking at goals that I think helps free us from that anxiety and use goals in a way that will actually make us more whole, more centered, more calm, more kind to ourselves, and just really free us from the chains that keep us stuck. At the end of this video, I'm going to be mentioning this again, but I created a downloadable list of my favorite resources that I've collected through the years to help me set goals. It is at heathercleary.com/goal resource. And it's just a list of my favorite books, websites, courses, that kind of stuff. There aren't that many of them because I'll be honest, I get a lot of anxiety when I look at resources about goals. Very often they seem really overwhelming to me. So I have collected them very slowly through the years, and I'm only including those things that I really have found to be transformative for me and help me think about goals and habits, because I think habits are kind of a part of this conversation, how to think about them in a new way. So again, you can get that at heathercleary.com/goal resource. I had a lot of fun planning this week, guys, because I just have so many ideas about it, and I had no idea how many ideas I had before I started really looking at the questions that came in, addressing them, and realizing what the different things that I had figured out through the years to help me make goals less anxiety producing. So hi, Jenna, it's good to see you. Okay, what I want to start out with is this quote from a Franciscan monk whose name is Richard Rohr. It says, Richard Rohr says, "God does not ask and expect you to do anything new until God has first made it desirable and possible for you to do it." I think when we think about what God wants us to do, my old way of looking at it was that it was anxiety producing because God was God and God's expectations were up here, and probably it would be uncomfortable and it would make me, it would make me feel anxious and stressed, and it just was so overwhelming I wanted to shut down. And I think Richard Rohr's quote helps us remember that what God calls us to should feel attractive, should feel possible, because God is a gentle, kind parent who truly wants us to thrive. If we start off thinking that what God expects of us is unpleasant and impossible, we have already started lying to ourselves about where we should be rooted. The second quote I want to read is by Brian McLaren. He says, "How we get there determines where we arrive." How you carry out your goals, how they make you feel, is important. If you feel anxious, you are not going to arrive at a place through the goal that makes you feel anxious that will be whole for you. There is no way to go to try to achieve a goal that makes you feel terrible and arrive at a place that does not already make you feel terrible. Those are one and the same. How you get there is as important as where you want to go. And so really these two quotes for me have helped me start thinking about the process being just as important as the destination. If we lose sight of the process and we make the process terrible for ourselves, we have already lost and we won't be as effective. It might seem like pushing yourself harder is the right way to begin, but it is not. It is not at all the right way to begin. As I was looking at these different reader questions and different reader suggestions, I really realized that the way I think about doing goals is I pretend I am babysitting a very bright, active, and stubborn toddler. I think of my inner self, my inner creative self, as this kind of like crazy, active, excited, and also very limited creature who is depending on me to get them through their day. And if I don't treat them in the very kind way, like I would treat any toddler, I am going to have them on the floor kicking and screaming, or I'm going to be out at a restaurant and they're going to start throwing food. So I have to be really, really intentional and really aware of the limits of my toddler, their interests, their likes, their dislikes. If I lose sight of those things, I'm going to have a really cranky toddler on my hands. And if you have ever spent time with a cranky toddler, you know that nothing gets done and you want to poke your eye with a sharp stick. So I say this because I really love toddlers. I think sometimes we talk down about children and say, oh, it's so childish, oh, they're being so babyish. But the honest truth is, from 0 to 5 years in your life, you have the most brain development that you will ever have again in your life. You learn a language fluently from scratch without any lessons. You learn how to walk. You learn basic social cues and sociability. You learn stuff like colors and music. You learn to count. There are all kinds of things, a crazy amount of learning that happens in the first 5 years of life. It is a tremendously fruitful time. So when I say that we're babysitting a toddler, I'm not saying we're babysitting someone whiny and entitled. I'm saying we're babysitting one of God's creations who is at one of the most fruitful and wonderful and creative times in their lives, but it's also one of the most challenging. So we have to be really kind to this toddler and guide them through the process of gaining the skills that they need in order to not be a toddler anymore. And I will tell you, after about 6 years of setting goals for myself, what I can ask of my inner creative self is very different than what I can ask when I was really starting out and definitely a toddler. Now my inner creative self is probably like a 12-year-old, right? Because I've been doing it for a number of years. And I can ask for more. My inner self is can handle a little bit more structure. But when you're first starting out on doing goals, that is not a realistic thing. You can't give your inner toddler, a HR project and expect them to know how to use Excel, right? Like, you just can't. So that is kind of our starting point. We are babysitting a toddler who is joyful and creative and worthy of our respect. And we are going to guide that toddler through each day in a way that makes them feel happy and creative and like they got to do their favorite things in the world. So the number one, to get started with toddlers, the first thing is you have to be really clear and you have to use baby steps. I added a few things to this thing at the beginning, this whole training at the beginning, because just a couple of minutes ago, I realized I hadn't really talked about baby steps. And so I really wanted to include that. But first I want to go to this quote by Tanya. A reader, Tanya, asked me this question: how do I begin setting goals? I want to start Bible journaling, but I haven't found the time to do so. So what can I do about how to make goals work for me if you're drawn towards them? How can I have myself work on these goals? I don't even know where to start. Okay, Tanya, that is a really good question, and that is exactly where most of us are starting. We have kind of a vague idea, like, I want a Bible journal. But what does that even look like? Like, how do you get from wanting to do it to spending a half hour every day making beautiful spreads. Like that leap, it's like over a cliff. So we have to think about it as you would teaching a toddler, say, to get dressed for the first time. A toddler doesn't know how to tie their shoes. They haven't figured out how to button buttons. If they button them, they're off. They put on their shirt inside out, or when they're putting on their shirt, they get their head stuck in the armhole. We're starting from a really, really basic ground level place when you are starting goals. So it's really important to kind of watch yourself and see where you're stumbling and think, aha, I'm trying to put my head through the armhole. I need to teach myself how to find the neck hole first and then get my arms through. I remember when my kids were really little, I would give them a busy board that had like shoelace, and it had some buttons to do, and all of these like small little skills that they needed to practice. That's the level of skill that we're going to be building when we first start goals. So when you say, I want to do Bible journaling, you might have to start with, I want to watch a video of someone who is already doing Bible journaling. I want to buy some art supplies. I want to sit with my pen and a blank sheet of paper and just do some basic, circles and squiggles just to get used to using these new supplies. Very, very small steps. You won't sit down and automatically go to Bible journaling. You're going to have to break it down for yourself and think, okay, what sounds like the first inviting step towards Bible journaling? And then write it down. I find that if I write down the steps, when it comes time to take the action, at least for me, I feel a lot less afraid because I've already done the thinking and I can just get started on the doing. So for me, if I were going to do something like Bible journaling, I would sit down with a blank sheet of paper and I'd say, I don't know where to start. Do I have supplies? Do I have any mentors that might help me? Do I need to just practice with a blank sheet of paper or a brainstorming list? Getting started with some really small steps, the busy board steps, rather than sending a 3-year-old into their room and saying, get dressed and put on your shoes, and they don't even know how to deal with shoelaces, right? So we have to really break down what we're doing into the smallest steps possible. I would recommend writing those steps down and keeping it in a list, in a journal, on a Post-it note, whatever works for you. And then knowing the next time I want to work on this, I have a list of action steps to take that are very clear, very gentle, and are at the skill level that I'm actually at, versus this high expectation thing that you don't even know how to do yet. Okay, so we drastically lower our expectations. We're working with toddlers, not with teenagers, yes, or even with grown-ups. We're not even close to that. Number 2, we make really clear action steps that are at the skill level we already possess, not the thing that we hope to get to because we're not there yet, but where we are at the ground level. The next thing I would say is, here we go. I got a reader question from Jacoba, who said that she has a chronic health condition and she has really hesitated to set goals because she knows how very limited her time and energy is. And I think that that's a really good point, because if goals don't work for us, given our daily life, given our actual reality, then we're not going to do them. The number one rule when you're dealing with toddlers is you make sure they have enough sleep and you make sure that they have something substantial in their stomach before you do anything with them. If you neglect those 2 steps, you are going to be pulling your hair out because they will be just a squirrely mess. So before you do anything else with goals, you can't do these goals if you are overtaxing your energy levels. If you are overtaxing yourself, you are not going to make any progress. If you feel harried and overstressed right now, might I gently suggest that one of the first goals that you would set would be to institute some kind of Sabbath for yourself, a rest. God created the world and rested. And I think that we really have neglected as a Christian culture to emphasize how much the Bible talks about rest, models rest, and insists that we actually take some time to stop working and recenter ourselves. you will not get very far if you are pushing yourself to your limits all the time, and if you are trying to do things without any reserves. So I would suggest setting aside a day, half a day, to get off from social media, or stop doing housework, or stop getting on your computer, whatever guidelines that you need to set up in order to have some reserves. So you've got to have good expectations. You've got to have reasonable expectations. We're working with toddlers, not teenagers. We've got to break things down into really small steps that meet us at our current skill level, not where we want to be, but where we actually are. And we have to make sure that we are dealing with our energy level at its realistic level, not at if we had twice as much energy and twice as much time. And therefore, we have to be really serious about rest, and we really need to be serious about nourishing ourselves. To get to the next point, Judy asked, I quote unquote want to follow through with things, but I don't. I want to put effort into developing skills in painting, but I don't. Or I do a little and then I come up with excuses why I can't. And I totally understand where you are coming from, Judy. I have done this to myself. I did this to myself for so many years. I don't do it anymore, but I did it for so many years. One of the really refreshing things about toddlers is how honest they are. If you tell a toddler to do something and they don't want to do it, you are going to know right away. And adults have gotten to the point where we tell ourselves we want to do things and we don't even know that we don't want to do them, we can't do them, or we simply don't have time to do them, right? We will, generate all of these messages in our heads about what we should be doing while ignoring the fact that we don't have the skills, we don't have the time, we don't have the actual desire to do it. And you can get really turned around that way and really lose sight of what you're excited to do, what you actually are equipped to do. And then when you say, I will do this, I will start painting, and you don't do it, you feel terrible about yourself. You feel awful. And oftentimes that creates this loop where you don't trust yourself to follow through on things. You shame yourself about not following through, and that shame is just like a lead weight pressing down on you all the time. Toddlers are not like that. If toddlers don't know how to do it, they will tell you, or they will refuse to do it. And I think embracing that radical honesty of toddlers is a really important way to help ourselves honor our commitments to ourselves, or figure out that those expectations or commitments are not reasonable. In his book, Getting Things Done, David Allen talks about this, and the way he talked about really clarified it for me. If you are walking around with these commitments in your head that you're not keeping, you are kind of going to feel terrible all the time, even if you're pretending or have forgotten about the commitments. Your brain in the background is constantly thinking about them. But the thing is, you don't have to feel awful. You have 3 choices if you have made a commitment that you are not keeping. Number 1, you can say no to the commitment. Our culture tells us that saying no to it, once you make a commitment, you have to stick with it. I think that's hogwash. If it's not working and you're not doing it, it's better to be honest with yourself and say no to it, rather than have it on your back burner and be shaming yourself about it. It is much better to be honest rather than to break commitments. David Allen gives this example. If you make a date to go to lunch with a friend and you get sick, or you're having a terrible day, or your car breaks down, the right thing to do is to go call your friend and say, I can't come today. If you just don't show up, that is terrible. If you call and let your friend know, that is a different matter. So if we have these open commitments to ourselves that we are not honoring, it is better to decide, I cannot commit to this right now, than it is to keep it open and keep mulling about it and shaming yourself for not committing it. The next thing that you can do, if you have a commitment that you're not following through on, is reevaluate the commitment, renegotiate it. if you decided, I'm going to do an hour of exercise every day, and you are not doing it, you might say, I'm going to do 5 minutes of exercise every day. I'm going to go for a walk around my block every day. If that much lower commitment is feasible, you will be much more likely to do it than the really high expectation that you set for yourself. So if you have a commitment that is really important to you, but you're not doing it, you might look at where your expectations are and drastically lower them. My very first goal, when I really started setting goals, was to write for 15 minutes once a week. And very honestly, I had done a master's degree earlier before I had kids, and I was writing quite a bit more than that. After I had kids, 15 minutes once a week was actually a pretty big commitment for me. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it was all I could manage. And it felt hard to set so low of a goal for myself, but I will tell you, I showed up for those 15 minutes. And showing up and keeping the commitment was much more important than spending a lot of time. So if you think of yourself as a toddler and you know that your skill level is down here, make sure that you negotiate agreements with yourself that are reasonable and actually doable for the skill level that you're at. And renegotiating those allows you to fulfill them rather than break commitments to yourself. The last thing that you can do is just do the commitment. If you are saying no to ones that you really don't like or don't want to do, and you're lowering your expectations about those commitments that you have, then really show up for the ones that you're going to do. If you are regularly not showing up for commitments that seem reasonable to you, that you've decided you do, then let me tell you, you're not lazy, you're not dumb, you probably are carrying a really heavy load of shame around. And if you're really struggling with getting those commitments done, I would really suggest getting some therapy or looking up some books on shame. I have a couple suggested in the resources download that I'm going to talk about, that I'll give you the link for at the end of this. Because if you are constantly not meeting commitments to yourself, there is a deeper problem at work, and you won't really solve that problem until you address that shame that you're carrying around. Okay, next question. How do I overcome the despair or critical voice inside my head that tells me that of course I failed, and then tries to persuade me it's of no use to keep going? It's fine to say, be positive, but how do you be the positive person in your life when all you feel is negative or overwhelmed? Okay, I have a couple things to say to this really good question. Number one, there's sort of the things that you need to do and also the things that you need to remember. The thing you need to do when you're in those moments of having the terrible stuff in your head that's coming at you when you take a brave step forward, because that voice will come, I know, it still comes for me, is that you are caring for a toddler. So if the voice that you are hearing if you listen to it and think, would I speak this way to a toddler? You might stop yourself and go, wow, that's really caustic. Like if you saw a toddler struggling to take their first step, would you say, you're failing right now. You fell right there, and this is clearly not going to work. You should just stop trying. No one would say that to a toddler, right? They are full of possibility. And so if you reevaluate those voices based on the fact that you're dealing with a very precious child inside of you who is taking stumbling but very promising steps forward, it might kind of jolt you out of that knee-jerk reaction to harshly judge your efforts. We are lowering our expectations so much that we can look at ourselves with realism rather than with overblown pride, I am a fully fledged artist. No, we are a toddler. So we have to judge our efforts based on what a toddler is capable of, not on what someone who has been doing something for 20 years is capable of. So that's the thing that you can do. And that is kind of a be positive, but it's a very specific be positive. We are remembering where we actually are and speaking to ourselves within that context. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is those negative voices, those terrible voices, are part and parcel of taking brave steps forward. The only way to deal with them ultimately is to turn down the volume of them, or to practice ignoring them or letting them chatter on, but just continue to do what you're doing. Every creative person that I know that has written a book about creativity talks about these voices. Everybody. Anne Lamott calls it radio station KFKD, which, if you spell it out, has the F word in it. Elizabeth Gilbert talks about these terrible fear-mongering voices that just say no, 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 no over and over and over again. Everybody talks about these voices. So if you are surprised by them, if you think, if I hear these voices, it means I'm going to fail, then you have completely unrealistic expectations. You will hear them. And I will tell you that at the beginning, the voices are the loudest, right when you are getting started. When you first get started on any new venture, but especially if you haven't taken these kinds of brave steps forward, the voice will be at its loudest when you first get started, and even with the dumbest stuff that it is that you have to do. I remember that one of the most terrified that I have ever been with a goal was on one of my very first goals, and I've written about this before. It was going and buying a domain name for my website. Like literally, it's like type in the domain name that you want and click buy now. Like so easy. And I was shaking while I was doing it because the voices of shame were so loud in my head. So if you have that expectation that you'll never hear those voices, you will be knocked over immediately when you hear them. If you know that they are there and that every creative person you admire also has those voices playing, you will be much less likely to be surprised by them or to take them as seriously as you otherwise might. I think it's also important to make sure you're rested. You are much more likely to feel oppressed and to feel anxious and hear those voices if you are sleep deprived, if you are hungry, if you are, I find that my hormonal cycles also play into that. So just be really aware of your body, how your body is doing, and making sure that you are rested and rejuvenated and having fun in the stuff that you're doing. Speaking of being fun, with toddlers, you also have to keep it really fun or keep it really short. So I find that when I set a really audacious goal, I have to set some kind of limit for myself so that I know I only have to work for so long. Usually for me, that's either a time limit, if it's a really difficult goal, like going and buying that domain name when I first was getting started. I'll set a timer for 15 minutes. If my hands are shaking while I'm doing it, I only have to go for 15 minutes and then I'm done. If 15 minutes doesn't sound doable, 5 minutes, totally fine. Sometimes I will set the timer, and once I get into the flow of doing the task, I can actually go longer for 15 minutes. Sometimes I'm so frightened by it that even 5 minutes when the timer goes off, I'm like, I have to be done with this and put it away. And then you honor that commitment and you put it away and you come back to it later. Sometimes I'll tell myself, when you finish those 5 minutes, you get a piece of chocolate, or you can go call someone that you really wanted to have a conversation with, or you can go play a round of Angry Birds and just totally geek out on doing something silly for a couple of minutes. Building in prizes, setting timers for yourself, setting word limits if you're a writer, all of those tools help you keep it really short, really concrete. So when you finish 5 minutes of really hard work, you can celebrate and you can feel so good about it. It doesn't have to be a really big commitment for it to give you such a burst of self-confidence and just pride in your accomplishment. And those feedback loops of you do the hard commitment, you get a prize, and you really feel good about yourself. So then the next time you go to do it, you feel excited to get the reward at the end, and you know that you'll feel really good about yourself. That creates a feedback loop that continues to keep you motivated and continues to help you move forward. It's at the beginning that you need to reward yourself more, because the work itself will turn into the reward, and the thing that you have longed to do but haven't had the skills or the focus to be able to do will finally be the thing that makes you feel joy each day. Julia Cameron talks about this, and one of her tools that I would recommend is setting up an artist date for yourself. She says once a week, go out and do something really charming. Have it, go to a museum that you wanted to do, that you wanted to see, go take a walk in a beautiful place, go buy yourself some sort of small treasure that it doesn't have to be very expensive. Like, you know, I love boxes of Nerds, like taking a walk to the 7-Eleven and buying yourself a pack of Nerds, like you're a, you know, 7-year-old who got an extra $1 of spending money. These little tiny things to treat yourself really kindly and to make your life kind of an enjoyable adventure will do so much to motivate you to do the work that is hard but also super rewarding. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is I am going to talk about something that I think about as the law of conservation of energy. And that is this: if you set up an intention to work on something new, it is going to take time and energy away from the other things that you're doing. It's like a mathematical equation. Whenever I say, I'm really going to work on building up my yoga routine, the other things that I already have running, the other habits or daily practices or whatever, my time and energy spent on them goes down. It's like two sides of an equation. Add more inputs here, something is going to get subtracted over here. This is not necessarily a bad thing. I kind of like novelty, so I find myself like, this month I'm really interested in yoga, and this month I'm really interested in bullet journaling, and this month I'm really working on my reading challenge. And I've kind of found myself that each month I kind of have some sort of new interest area that sparks me. Right now it's this book by David Allen that I mentioned earlier called Getting Things Done, and the suggestions that he's making the suggestions that he's made are having me go around and reevaluate a lot of different things that I have in my life and set them up in a new way. So that's taking time away from other stuff that I do. If you go into setting goals thinking, I'm going to add something to my already packed schedule, and I'm going to make sure that I don't drop any other balls and I don't adjust any of my other expectations in those other areas, you are going to set yourself up for failure. If you add time and intention to a new venture, you will have to figure out where to cut, or you will just naturally cut yourself by the things that are not that interesting to you. I would say you can take two approaches to that. If you absolutely do not have space in the old stuff that you are doing for anything new, then I think you have to sit down and be really intentional about cutting something before you commit to something new. Because if you don't cut, you will either not keep that new commitment to yourself, or you will drop balls that will make you feel anxious or upset or ashamed. So you can take the intentional route and just say, if I'm going to commit an hour to this, I probably need to cut an hour and a half, probably a little bit more, from some other commitment to make space for this new thing. The other thing that you can do, which I generally do, is I just say, oh well, I got a book on yoga, and for a month, I wasn't reading as much, and I wasn't bullet journaling as much, and I thought, oh well, that's okay. I had enough space in my general life that I wasn't going to be like forgetting to take my children to school or, you know, not following through on work commitments. But I didn't have enough time that I was going to be able to maintain all of the other little fun projects that I was going, and that's okay. So you can either decide to let the chips fall where they may, or if you have a tighter schedule, you might actually have to take some intentional time to figure out which chips have to be set down, because it is a closed system and you will not magically generate more time and more willpower, which is actually kind of the bigger deal, to get yourself to do something new. To start a new project, new intention, new goal, is a really taxing thing. And it's not just about the time, it's about the emotional energy that you have to invest in it. We are dealing with a toddler. They only have so many good hours in a day, and they have to take a nap in the middle of the day. If you mess with that, they're gonna be really unhappy. I just want to say that I really hope that these ideas have been helpful, because at least for me, I spent a lot of years wanting to feel like I was getting the things done that I really wanted to, but feeling so overwhelmed by the process that I felt ashamed. And I even had a hard time. I was so overwhelmed that it was hard to go seek out resources. So if you're watching today, or if you watch this when it goes onto my Facebook page afterwards, I just want to say well done for showing up and watching it in the first place, because that itself is a pretty laudable action to take. It takes a lot of energy to try something new, to start incorporating something like goals that can often feel kind of overwhelming. So I just want to congratulate yourself. I would just want you to congratulate yourself and give yourself credit for trying something new, for testing something new out. And just remember that if things feel overwhelming, that it's okay to say no to stuff. If you watch this video and think, this is really good to know, but I'm not ready to start setting goals yet, I think you should honor that commitment to yourself of not really being ready. You can write it down someplace or just keep it in your mind and think, someday I will be ready for this. That is an okay thing to take. Or if you're like, I don't have bandwidth for this month, but maybe in 6 months, maybe get on your calendar and write a little note to yourself to reconsider something, a way to start setting up goals in 6 months. Be graceful with yourself, because the way that you get there determines where that you're going, right? And we want to end up in a place that makes us feel whole, that makes us feel like we are worthy of love, and that we are grateful for where we've arrived. And we won't get to a place of gratitude by ignoring our bodies, by shaming ourselves, or by trying to do more than we can actually handle. Okay, so I told you about this downloadable resource that I created. It's just a simple list of all of the things, all of the resources, books, websites. There's a course in there on developing better goal setting habits and just habits in general. How do you create these systems that kind of keep you going and help you understand what the next thing is to do? So that is at heathercaleary.com/goal resource. Again, heathercaleary.com/goal resource. And it's all about creating sustainable and wholehearted habits. The next time that I do Little Yes Live will be the first week in February, and I'm going to take you behind the scenes on how I set goals personally. I just want to put a caveat out there. I've been setting goals for 6 years, so the system that I'm using now has evolved slowly, and I am also a really detail-oriented and very organizationally minded person. So I do something that's kind of elaborate. That works for me. It might not necessarily work for you, but there might be things that you could pick up on that would help you develop your own goal-setting routines and tools, okay? So I look forward to seeing you next time, and thanks so much for tuning in. Bye.